The media is doing a really good job of perpetrating a myth that there is just one type of transgender person, and that is a type of person who is oppressed and suffering because they are born in the wrong body. So I wanted to make this video to talk about the various types of transgenderism and to sort of illuminate light on why it is that we don't lump gender identity and transgenderism under one umbrella, because there are a lot of different reasons that people claim to have a trans identity. So the first is autogynophilic. Somebody with autogynophilia is a man who is actually sexually aroused at the idea of his body being a female body. So this is actually a paraphilia. It's a sexual turn-on for them to present as being female. Oftentimes, the more that they can pass as a female, the more sexual gratification they get. So sometimes these guys will actually dress up as females to go into the women's restrooms to masturbate because they're finding sexual pleasure at the idea of themselves as being a woman. Next, we have pretenders. And as much as the LGBTQ community wants to pretend like there are pretenders. And we have a couple of different reasons for being pretenders. One of which is we have predators. We have predators who have figured out that if they say that they are a woman, that they can gain access to women and children in vulnerable spaces. These are guys who are using tender-hearted people's views on transgenderism in order to gain access to people that they are going to victimize. We are seeing this increasingly in jails, where men are saying that they identify as women so that they get transferred to women's prisons and have access to women. We're seeing this in schools and even children. We're having this happen in children where older kids are self-IDing as girls, older boys are self-IDing as girls, and then gaining access to little girls in bathrooms. And people said this would never happen, but guess what? It's happening. We have documented cases where women and girls are being sexually assaulted by men who claim to be women. Another reason that people pretend is that they can gain an advantage. So if you have a very mediocre male athlete who suddenly decides to say that he's transgender, all of a sudden he can compete against women and has an advantage. So there are people who are just saying that they're transgender without having any of the mental health issues associated with it. And they want to be treated as an oppressed group of people, when in fact they have ill intentions towards others. Finally, we have gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria is what most people think of when they think of transgender people. Those are people who feel uncomfortable in their body, who are feeling like there's a disconnect between their brain and their body. Unfortunately, we have come to accept the idea that gender dysphoria is something innate, that somebody can actually be born in the wrong body, which is kind of absurd. I just kind of grapple at how we ever got to the point where we would accept a narrative that somebody's born in the wrong body and that we should therefore take a healthy body and force it to become dysfunctional. I don't understand how we got to that point. So we take increasingly younger children whose bodies are perfectly healthy and cause them to be dysfunctional because people say that it's normal to feel uncomfortable in your body and want to change it. A lot of these kids who are developing gender dysphoria at a young age suffered from trauma, oftentimes sexual trauma. So transgender ID becomes a coping mechanism to deal with that trauma. And that's what happened to me. I was sexually assaulted as a kid. In order to deal with that trauma, I decided that I would present as a boy, and that would keep me safe from ever being sexually assaulted again. So if I had lived at a time when people said I was born in the wrong body and that my gender dysphoria was appropriate and that my trans ID was actually a normal developmental path, I likely would have been pushed to be on hormones and eventually have double mastectomy and have my uterus removed, all because of a sexual assault that occurred. And rather than getting help processing that sexual assault, I would have caused further damage to the body that had already been traumatized. There's also internalized homophobia. So there are people who are gay, who are same-sex attracted, who are really uncomfortable with the implications of that. And so they decide to present as the opposite sex so that they appear to be straight. And oftentimes these are people who grew up in homes where they fear that they will not be accepted as gay, and so they identify as the opposite sex. And for some reason, as a society, we are more accepting of the idea that somebody could be born in the wrong body than the idea that they could have same-sex attraction, which is really sad, because what this does is it causes, especially younger people, increasingly younger people, to damage their body in order to force it to become something that it's not. Finally, we have, well, not finally, actually, there's so many of these, but these are the ones I'm going to do. Rapid onset gender dysphoria and peer pressure. So Dr. Lisa Lippman did a study and found some predictive factors for teenage gender dysphoria. So these are kids who normally seem to be fine and then suddenly develop a trans identity. And surprise, it's due to social media, it's due to peer pressure, it's due to trying to fit in. And oftentimes it's due to autism. So people who are on the autism spectrum oftentimes have a hard time negotiating those gray areas. So they feel like if they don't fit into these very rigid stereotypes of gender that we have, that they're actually transgender. And instead of encouraging these kids to embrace who they are, we are encouraging them to be something that they're not. And finally, we have gender non-conforming, which is what a lot of us are, just gender non-conforming. We don't follow the rigid stereotypes that people are saying that we need to follow in order to be a certain gender. And one of my biggest concerns about the trans movement right now is that people who are transgender are adopting these very regressive, harmful gender stereotypes in order to pronounce themselves as something that they're not. So it's like they're trying to suggest that if they merely, as like for me, okay, I have short hair, and if I have short hair and I decide to wear a flannel shirt and blue jeans, then I'm a boy, because girls don't have short hair. And this is just absurd. And so we're encouraging kids who are gender non-conforming to rather celebrate who they are. We're telling them that they're something that they're not, and then we're encouraging them to feel a dissonance between how they're comfortable and what their biology is. So I just want to review these because I think it's really important that we have a sense of there being different kinds of transgender people, and their motivations are very, very different. So Autogynophilacs, men who are sexually aroused at the idea of themselves being female, are really pushing to get access to female spaces. They're really pushing the idea that trans women are women. They're really pushing the idea to be accepted, and they have this amazing persecution narrative, as if they are the most persecuted group on earth, and they're spreading a lot of lies and doing a lot of things that are really harmful to people who have gender dysphoria. They are perpetuating this idea that if they don't get what they want, they'll kill themselves, and they're using this to manipulate us. Just want you to know, these are bad actors who are using our compassion to manipulate society so that they can get sexually aroused. And the pretenders and predators, same thing. These are bad actors who are manipulating society in order to gain access to women's spaces, in order to gain access to women's sports, in order to sort of take on the idea that they're oppressed because they are presenting as a woman. And so, again, these are bad actors. These are not people we should have compassion for. These are people who are trying to hurt us, who are trying to harm society. And then we have gender dysphoria. These are people who have a legitimate mental health issue. These are people who need our compassion and services. These are people who, for whatever reason, are very uncomfortable within their body and need mental health services and compassion, and not to be told that they're born in the wrong body. Because if you are traumatized by sexual assault and you develop a trans identity in order to protect yourself from being sexually assaulted again, and then you're swept up in this idea that you were actually born in the wrong body, and your self-hatred is perfectly normal. And in fact, it's so normal that we're going to cause your perfectly healthy body to become dysfunctional with hormones and surgery. That's not how you treat a mental disorder. We are doing these people a huge disservice. Finally, we're encouraging people who are gender non-conforming to think that they are in fact transgender, which is the opposite of what the feminist movement was all about in the 70s, when we were trying to say it's okay for girls to play with Legos and it's okay for boys to cook. Now we've got trans activists who are saying if girls play with Legos, they're probably actually a boy, and if boys like to cook, it's because they're actually a girl. I am so horrified by the fact that we are now treating all transgender people as if they're the same. And oftentimes it's those Autogynophiliacs and the predators who are pushing this narrative. They're the ones who are encouraging children to be put on puberty blockers. They're the ones who are encouraging children to have surgeries. They're the ones who are insisting that they need to have spaces to women and children where they're vulnerable. This is all a predator's narrative that our society has bought into. And I just can't believe I said bought. Excuse me. That our society is bought into. And we really need to push against it, because if we don't, we're going to increasingly have kids who are damaging their healthy bodies, who are going to become addicted to cross-gender hormones. And at some point, these kids are going to realize what a horrible mistake was made, and they're going to be mad. They're going to be mad that their teachers lied to them and told them that boys can have vaginas and girls can have penises. They're going to be mad that nobody taught them about biology. They're going to be mad that somebody set them up to be victimized. They're going to be mad because their healthy bodies are now permanently dysfunctional. And you know who they're going to blame? They're going to blame the doctors, the teachers, the pastors, and all those others who supported this idea that you can be born in the wrong body. Because you can't be born in the wrong body. We are born in exactly the body we were born into. We have a choice. We can make the best of it, or we can pretend like there's something wrong with it. Now, if there actually is a dysfunction with our body, we can treat that dysfunction. But what the trans narrative is doing is saying that a healthy body is dysfunctional. Ah! Okay. So keep in mind, when people are talking about transgenderism, that there are a whole slew of different types of trans. It's not all the same. And that often this trans narrative is being pushed by predators who are gleeful at the idea that they now have access to women and children in spaces where they're vulnerable. And nobody's keeping an eye on these kids. Nobody's standing up for these women. And we need to start.